Hey everyone, it's Brad. Happy Monday. Hope you're having a great day. I just wanted to check in with you quickly. I've got another quick tip for you on how to make your data more efficient and effective for driving decisions. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about getting the level of precision right when you're reporting or talking about your numbers. Because this is a big problem. Too often in organizations, we don't have the right level of precision. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean by that. Imagine that you're trying to figure out what the population of Cambodia was. So you ask two of your friends, and they come back with two different answers. Your first friend says, I think it's about 17 million. Your second friend says, I think it's 16,139,251. Now, I pose this question in my workshop all the time for people, and I ask them to vote on who are you going to believe? 9 times out of 10, people will say, well, I'm going to believe that second number because it sounds more accurate, doesn't it? The first one sounds like maybe just a guess. The second one sounds more rigorous. Well, it turns out, you probably guessed where the story is going, the first person was actually more accurate. 17 million is much closer to the actual population of Cambodia than that other very precise number. And this is the problem. Sometimes we confuse precision and accuracy. Your brain tends to have more confidence in numbers that are very precise, and that could sometimes get you in trouble. Now, precision also gets you in trouble in a couple other ways. If you were looking through a column, say, of 10 or 15 numbers, and they were all really big, long numbers like that, 16,139,251. Imagine 10 numbers like that in a row. Now imagine a column where the numbers were rounded off maybe to the million, 17 million, or the 100,000, 17,500,000, or even the 10,000, 17,530,000. You're going to have a much easier time getting through that second column of numbers. You're going to get through it much faster. And that's where it's important to understand the difference between precision and accuracy, because sometimes you don't need that extra precision. The third thing that's going to happen when you tell a story that's too precise, your audience is going to have to take in more. It's going to be a more complicated story. If I'm talking to you about Cambodia and I say the population of Cambodia is about 17 million people, you're going to get that point and we can move on. It's pretty simple. If I say the population of Cambodia is 16,891,245, there's a really good chance now I just overcomplicated my story. And I'm not getting any benefit from that because you're going to walk away with the same impression of Cambodia whether I say 17 million or whether I say 16,891,245. Your impression isn't going to change. So there's no incremental benefit for the incremental level of complexity that you have to deal with. And if my story has a lot of numbers, that's just going to build up and make my story very hard to understand. More importantly, depending on which of those numbers I gave you, in 2 weeks, if somebody asked you what the population was of Cambodia, I bet more people who heard it as 17 million would actually remember. The people who got 16,891,245, unless you rounded it up in your head, hopefully to remember, you're probably not going to have any clue what the population is when it comes to 2 weeks later. It's just too complex. There's too much information. There's too many digits. So the question that we really need to figure out is, how much precision do you need? And there's not a single answer. It's going to always be dependent on what you're trying to accomplish. So let me give you a couple quick examples. Imagine that you're the quality manager in a razor blade factory. Now, the average razor blade is about 9/1000th of an inch thick. So they're pretty thin. Now, if you're the quality manager, you're probably going to need your reporting to at least 4 decimal points if you're going to be able to make good decisions about the quality of your razor blades. Now, on the other hand, imagine that you're in charge of making the armor for battleships, which can be 12 inches or more thick. In that case, you probably don't need to go to 4 decimal points. You probably only need to measure to about 1 decimal point, maybe even less, in order to make good decisions about whether or not the plates are the proper size. And so that's the first key thing. There's no one rule that I could tell you to say, here's always the right level of precision. It's always dependent on what you're trying to accomplish. So, okay, let me show you the technique. Super simple technique for figuring out the level of precision. So I'm going to show you the technique. Now, the number I'm showing you has digits on both the left and right side of the decimal point. And I'm doing that just so you could sort of see the technique on either side. You could do this if you only have numbers on the left side. You can do this if you only have numbers on the right side of the decimal point, or you can do it like this scenario where you have both. So take whatever number you have, and step number one is go to the number that is to the furthest right. And again, doesn't matter if there's a decimal point or not, go to whatever number is the furthest right. And just ask yourself a simple question. If this number went up to 9 or went down to 1, would that change my interpretation or decision based on this number? And if the answer is no, get rid of it. You don't need that number. Then do the same thing. Now move over one number and do the same thing again. And if it's not going to help you with your decision or your interpretation, you don't need it. So now right away, in this particular example, we found out we don't even need to be using decimals for whatever this particular metric was. So now let's look at how we're going to deal with the numbers on the left side of the decimal point. Same thing, we're still going to start all the way to the right. We're going to ask our question. But this time, if we're not going to make a new decision, we can't get rid of the number, right? Because then it wouldn't make any sense. So instead we know, well, I could round this number off because having the precision of what this number is doesn't affect my decision making. So I could round it off to make it easier. And you're basically just going to keep doing that until you find a number that if it changed, would impact your decision making. And that tells you, okay, this is the right level of rounding that we have. This is the right level of precision. Now you're going to have a much more simple number. The other advantage of this number is that when you're reporting this, I know that if I ever see a change in the metric, the way it's being reported, that indicates I have to take some action. When you report with too much precision, those numbers change all the time, and they'll often change in ways that don't require any kind of new action or decision, but because the number changed, you focus on it, you spend time thinking about it. So this is going to help your efficiency because your metric is already set up that just a change in the metric indicates you have to do something. On most of your reports, I bet if the metric changes sometimes, it doesn't indicate any action because we're giving numbers that are too precise. So that's sort of the technique. Now there's one more thing that's sort of important. I showed you sort of, two different contexts, right? If you're in the razor blade factory versus the battleship armor factory. Now, the same is true for the same metric. So if I have one metric, imagine I'm talking about operating income for an $80 billion company. Now, for that one metric, there's not even one right level of precision. It depends on where and how that metric is being used. If I'm creating a shareholder report, I probably can round that number to the millions. And you see, that's often what companies do in shareholder reports. On the other hand, if I'm under some kind of IRS investigation, I might have to report that number to the millions place. I might have to report that number all the way down to the individual dollar place, depending on the nature of the audit. And so even with one specific metric or KPI, how that is being used should dictate the level of precision, and you might have to change it even if it's the same KPI, depending on the context. So that's the technique. Get the precision of the way you report your numbers aligned with your decision making. It will speed up people's understanding of them. It will speed up the analysis. It will speed up decision making. It'll make your stories easier to understand and easier to remember. And that's what we want if we want to influence good decision making. So we teach this technique. We teach a lot of techniques in rethinking data on how to get your data better aligned with your decision making. So feel free to check out Rethinking Data. I'd love to hear your comments in the window down below. If you want, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or as always, check out my website at www.availadvisors.com if you want more information and more ideas and more techniques to how to be more effective at turning data into action. Have a good day, everyone.